And we're very honored to welcome back for the third time the world-renowned political scientist and forensic researcher, Dr. Norman Finkelstein. He's written over a dozen books on Palestine, Israel, including a book due next month titled Gaza's Gravediggers, Inquiry into Corruption in High Places. The format of the event is that I'll have some questions for Norman to begin with, and then we have some audience pre-submitted questions. Hopefully this event will last an hour so we can see how many of those we can get through. We'll begin with some of the more immediate news that's on everyone's mind right now, and that's Israel's kidnapping of the Freedom Flotilla coalition crew on board a UK-flagged unarmed boat called the Magdalene. They were attempting to break Israel's illegal blockade of Gaza and deliver aid to the besieged population, which is already facing famine and genocide. Israel captured the boat 100 miles away from Gaza and detained 11 activists, including Greta Thunberg and the French MEP Rima Hassan. Dr. Finkelstein, what are your reflections on this latest attempt to break Israel's illegal blockade?
Well, first of all, I'm never afraid to say when I'm wrong. When I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I accept the fact of my fallibility. I was very skeptical about the boat going over to Gaza because my feeling was that in the past, the flotillas were attempted when nobody was paying attention to what was going on in Gaza. So there had been this brutal blockade of Gaza at the time of the best known of the flotillas, which was the flagship was the Mavi Marmara on May 31st, 2010. And that got a huge amount of publicity because Israel killed 9 passengers directly. Another passenger subsequently died in a coma. And there was murder and mayhem aboard the Mavi Marmara. The main reason it got attention was not because Israel killed people, because that's routine for Israel. The main reason was that the flotilla was led by a Turkish organization called İHA, IHH, and the head of state, Erdogan, decided to make an issue of it. So now you had a medium-sized state, Turkey, which was intervening, and that caused a certain amount of tumult at the UN. And it actually had a long history. There were 2 UN reports. There was a big case at the International Court, Criminal Court, the ICC. It had a lot of resonance, what happened to Mavi Marmara. But most of the flotillas, the boats are just captured and forgotten. There have been many attempts. I figured, number one, the boat's probably going to just be captured, it would be seized and there would be no publicity. And number two, my feeling was with the Mavi Marmara, there was a blockade that nobody even knew about. It was a very brutal blockade on Gaza at the time. At that time, we're talking about 2010, Israel was calibrating the number of calories of each person in Gaza, and it pegged the admission of admission of food to just below a starvation level. It was pretty brutal. They called it a humanitarian minimum diet, but it was in reverse, it could be called a starvation plus diet. So attention needed to be called to that. And in fact, right after the Mavi Marmara incident of May 31st, all the heads of states, beginning with Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, the line became, the situation is unsustainable. The situation is unsustainable. And there were some minor improvements after Mavi Marmara. This time I thought to myself, I think everybody knows there's a horror unfolding in Gaza. The fact that there's a starvation verging on famine in Gaza is widely known. So number one, I figured the boat, because there's no big state behind it. With the Mavi Marmara, Turkey was behind it. There was no big state behind it. And number two, I felt it was totally superfluous. Who needs it? Everybody knows what's going on. But I was wrong. I'm surprised. Greta Thunberg is actually quite a celebrity. I don't know. I never know whether it's what we call a big fish in a small sea or a big fish in a big sea. Well, she's a big fish in a big sea. Uh, and so her capture, it's like Kim Kardashian being captured. It's an event. And I was not aware of that. I had no idea she had that kind of quote unquote, I don't like the term obviously, of star power. So it did focus uh, tension. What will now come of it remains to be seen. Presumably, she'll be deported quickly and the incident will be forgotten. But it's always a reminder that news is very capricious. You never know what is going to make a headline. It's totally unpredictable what will capture public attention via the media or what will not capture public attention because the media ignores it. You just never know. And here I was surprised. I thought to myself, maybe I should have been on that boat. I wasn't asked, but if I were asked, maybe I should have been on that boat because she does have the power to attract significant media attention. And she's smart. Her line was, if we give up, if we give up on Gaza, we lose our humanity. That was a good line, and that's correct. It's correct. As Professor Chomsky liked to quote Confucius, and I began to quote Chomsky and Professor Chomsky and Confucius that the sign of a moral person is to keep fighting in the certain knowledge that it's hopeless, to keep struggling in the certain knowledge, to keep on your path in the certain knowledge that it's hopeless. And the reason for that is your whole being revolts at the prospect of just doing nothing. So it's not ultimately whether this or that will succeed. It's ultimately that you can't do nothing. And that's what I thought Greta Thunberg was saying, that if you, even if the situation is hopeless, if you give up, you've lost your humanity.
Thank you. I think there might yet be an opportunity for you to go since Francesca Albanese is calling for even more ships to break the blockade if something will come out of it.
As I said, you can never predict. You can maybe send 10 ships and the media will say, all right, we already did that story with Greta Thunberg and we're not going to do the copycats. You never know.
This might be.
I've studied the situation. There were many boats that went to Gaza, many. The one that captured the attention was the Mavi Marmara. And then there were subsequent to the Mavi Marmara got no media attention.
This might be 2025's encampments where the big Columbia one, caught the media.
I'm skeptical of that. Again, my skepticism is always has to always be contextualized within my fallibility. I believe that you have to focus on events that can involve masses of people, that they just can't be spectators. And these kinds of flotillas, they're spectacularly expensive. And how many people can afford to take off from work and go for a 2-week voyage in the Mediterranean? I'm for the mass actions. I think now the right thing to do, there are two possibilities in my mind, and I'm not an organizer, but I do watch events closely. One is to close down every Israeli consulate in the world. Every country has an Israeli consulate, to choose a date and saying we're shutting down the consulate and we're not moving. And then invite the mass arrests for civil disobedience. The other thing is at airports, it's impossible to check who's going where. It's just the nature of an airport. To close down the El Al terminal at every airport in the world. I think that can be done. And that will capture attention and it'll also cause a certain amount of chaos, which is, I think, warranted. But I'm for the mass actions. I don't think it's a good thing to turn power one of the reasons that like people like Lenin, uh, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin from the Russian Revolution, but not just him, the revolutionaries as a whole, why they oppose terrorist acts. It's because they said that terrorist acts turn everybody else into a spectator rather than being actively involved. And politics is about, the famous line by Marx in the inaugural address of the First International, the emancipation of the working class has to be done by the working class itself. And the general principle is we want to create a world in which people are engaged in their future, are engaged in the political process and governing themselves. That's the goal. You can't liberate human. You can't have a savior liberating you. That just goes against all radical politics. You have to liberate yourself. So one of the problems with uh, terrorism as a tactic, leaving aside the whole moral issue, but terrorism as a tactic is it turns everybody into a spectator. So we're sitting here on the web watching the path of the boat. That's not a good thing. We should be involved. So I'm for always thinking about activities, political involvement, in which it engages masses of people in the process.
Thank you, Norman.
I find the whole boat thing. It's look, what they did was great, but there's an element of elitism. I don't mean subjective elitism, objective elitism. It's 10 people who are quote unquote celebrities doing it. And we just don't want that, I don't believe. Though as a tactic, we don't want that. But of course, what they did was great. And I totally hold Greta Thunberg in the highest regard that she uses her celebrity in a good way.
Moving our attention to the culprits. So we'll come in a moment to your book, Gaza's Gravediggers, but I wanted to speak a bit about the more obvious culprits. You've stated that this particular genocide is not just a state project, but a national project of Israel. So while Netanyahu, Gallant, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir all are wholly complicit, but they're now being portrayed as perhaps the only guilty parties, as opposed to what polls show about wider Israeli society and their perspective on the genocide. What does that tell you about Israeli society, and how should the world respond to a?
There's something very seriously awry in Israeli society. It's an insane country. This is a country that's reveling. It's reveling in genocide. That poll, which everybody's trying to avoid now, the poll 2 weeks ago, which showed that nearly half, 40% of Israelis support genocide in Gaza. Now everybody's, Israel supporters. Oh, that poll was unscientific, and the poll didn't use the word genocide. Well, guess what? It was a very reputable Israeli polling firm that did it. Nobody has questioned. 1 second. Hello? Yes? Yeah, I'm right now doing a phone interview. I will call you back when I'm done. Okay? Bye-bye. So, everybody's trying to undermine the poll. It was a regular poll. The sampling was typical of a poll, the sampling done. And the poll found, all right, it didn't say genocide. Actually, it said something worse. The poll said if you conquer a city, if the Israeli government, if the Israeli army conquers a city, should it kill everybody in the city? And about half, 47%, said yes. Well, you didn't need genocide there. I mean, that's as literal as you can get. You should kill everybody in the city. This is an unhinged society. It's, look, I don't think it's true, and the scholarship doesn't show it's true. But the Germans always had the alibi. They said they didn't know because they could say, which is true, it was a totalitarian state. It is true, the information they got was only what the state wanted them to know. It is true that the genocide occurred under the cover of a war. It is true that they didn't know technically what was going on in the death camps, the systematic extermination. So they always can have the alibi that they didn't know. But of course they didn't. They didn't have to know every detail to know. So half the Jews who were killed during the Nazi Holocaust, half the Jews who were exterminated during the Nazi Holocaust, they weren't exterminated in Auschwitz, in the Treblinka, in Chelmo, the killing centers. They weren't. They were just lined up and shot dead. So in Babi Yar, they lined up tens of thousands of Jews in front of a ditch and shot them dead. So everybody in the army knows, and everybody in the army is talking. And when they go back home, the information filters, so they knew. They may not have known every detail, but they knew enough to know something horrible was happening. They knew enough to know something horrible was happening. But in the case of the Israelis, there's not even a pretext of not knowing. The soldiers post it on the web. They post the horrors they commit. They take selfies. They take videos when they are humiliating, degrading, sexually assaulting the Gazans, stripping them naked, forcing them to walk, forcing them to dance naked for the soldiers, including the female soldiers. There is no pretense of not knowing. So it's a very ugly picture. Israel's army is a citizen army. You know what a citizen army means? It means it's representative of Israeli society. These are not oddballs. These are not conscripts from the lower classes. These are representative of Israeli society. These folks who are carrying it out, the genocide in Gaza. It's an ugly picture.
Let's then dive a bit deeper on that and try to understand. I mean, I'm sure many people here, and you've definitely had the misfortune of having to debate Zionists over the years. And from my experience, it's one of the more dizzying and morally infuriating endeavors where you've put yourself through it over
I
the
don't
decades.
like I don't like the term Zionist. I'm just going to stop you short. You're free to say whatever you want, obviously. I'm just saying, from my point of view, this term Zionist it doesn't convey any information. Everybody has their own interpretation of what Zionism means. Some people say Zionist if you support a Jewish state. Some people say you're a Zionist if you support Jews being in Palestine, that it's Arab land and there shouldn't be Jews there. So it doesn't convey. But I think it's what does convey information. When B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, when it put out a report on whether Israel is an apartheid state, that was a big issue about 10 years ago when Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and various organizations weighed in on whether Israel was an apartheid state. I thought that the best formulation was the one by B'Tselem. Very simple. The head of B'Tselem at that point was a guy named Hagi, Hagar El-Ad, Haggai, Haggai, Hagar El-Ad. They put out a simple report. He was a physicist by training. He was a Harvard-trained physicist, a very smart guy. And like all people in the natural sciences, the more simple something is, the more elegant it is. So in mathematics, an elegant proof is a simple proof. If you can prove something in one page, and another person proves the same thing in 4 pages, it's the person who proved it in one page is considered the superior mind. And so they put out a simple report and they said, look, there's one state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, and that state is Oh, come on, guys. What is this? And that state, they said, is a Jewish supremacist state. Its foundations of the state is Jewish supremacy. So I prefer to speak to these folks, not as Zionists. They're Jewish supremacists. They believe Jews are superior. They believe Jews have rights, not only superior to Arabs and Muslims. They believe Jews are superior to everybody. That Jews have the right to commit genocide. So I would just say as a recommendation, we shouldn't use Zionist, which means nothing to anyone. But white supremacist, Jewish supremacist means something to people because they've heard the expression white supremacist, so they know the idea of being a supremacist and what it means and what it and the image it conjures. And that's what I think the Israelis are, the Jewish supremacists. And that should be our concern. The fact that not Zionism, because Zionism doesn't look. I wrote a doctoral dissertation on Zionism, so I know what Zionism is, and I suppose I have a stake in the term, but I'm all for getting rid of it. Not taking away my degree in the process, but I'm all for getting rid of it because I don't think it conveys information. And we should stop carrying on like a cult where we have a set terminology. You know, when people on the left historically, they always adopted a language which tried to reach masses of people to explain uh, what they were advocating, and I think that's should be our uh, approach as well.
Okay, but I think the word Zionist now has a very specific semiotic significance now, which can actually capture not just people like Netanyahu, but Joe Biden in the same umbrella as well, who aren't Jewish and supremacists themselves, but probably have a very specific idea about why they need Israel within that geopolitical situation at this
I
point.
have no idea what's going through their head. I think Joe Biden, he thinks Israel is good for guarding U.S. interests in the region. And he has three daughters. All daughters are married to to Jews, Jewish guys. So I suppose there's a kind of familial loyalty. I don't know what goes through their heads. What I do know is they're Jewish supremacists. They don't believe that Jews should be held to the same standard as anybody else. They're Jewish legally, morally, anything. They don't just believe Jews are better.
I think you've answered the question I was about to ask because I was just meant to ask what have you gleaned about the psychology of the Zionists, but then the answer for you is Jewish supremacy. Uh,
Yeah, that's it's not just the psychology. It's Jewish supremacy in law. In the case of Israel, if there's one state, as I believe there is between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, there's a hierarchy of rights. The Jews in the state of Israel are what you might call second-class citizens or third-class citizens. Jews in the West Bank, um, they live effectively in an apartheid state, and Jews in, excuse me, uh, Arabs in Israel are effectively second or third class citizens. Arabs in the West Bank are living in an apartheid state. And currently, the Arabs in Gaza are on the are facing an extermination. There's a hierarchy of rights, but what's clear is there's one ruling uh, ethnic group, Jews.
so we've highlighted some of the more well-known culprits of what's happening and the perpetrators behind it. Your upcoming book, which isn't out yet, Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places. The purpose, as you state, is to put officials in the highest places on notice. And you write, you cannot mangle truth and traduce justice with impunity. You cannot go your merry way after besmirching your calling and betraying your mandate. It will not be forgotten. It will no longer be business as usual if you choose to do the devil's work. Can you tell us what led you to writing this book and who are these gravediggers doing the devil's work, which you've spent months to meticulously expose?
Well, first of all, an acknowledgement. two acknowledgments. Number one, they're not the main perpetrators who I go after. Everybody knows the main perpetrators. Everybody knows Mr. Biden, Mr. Blinken, uh, and the rest of the crowd. I had nothing really to add to that. I think these are uh, well-known war criminals, and I had nothing new to add. I also had nothing new to add on the conflict. When I wrote Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom, that history was barely known to anybody. All these human rights reports, which just, they're not even reported on. They're literally not. I mean, the mainstream media won't even report on them. The only one that got publicity in the past was the Goldstone report, the report that was authored by the South African Jew and self-described Zionist, who was also a leading figure in international law. And that was after Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9. And the Goldstone report, for various reasons not worth going into right now, got a huge amount of publicity. But otherwise, the Amnesty reports, the Human Rights Watch reports, the reports by B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, they're not known at all. So I wanted to preserve the historical record. I think you can't bring back the dead, but you can honor their memory or respect their memory. And one way of respecting the memory is not letting what happened be forgotten. So I wrote the book as a testimonial. The spirit of the book was after the Nazi extermination camp, Nazi extermination campaign. There were two Russian Jews, Ilya Ehrenberg and Victor Grossman, I think his name, and they wrote a famous, huge compendium called the Black Book on Nazism, in which they just they were Russian Jewish, um, just documented all the crimes, all the crimes, all the crimes. And so I saw my book, Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom, the book that came out in 2018, as simply preserving the historical record. And I thought that was the least that can be done for those who died, and also a memory of those who were complicit in one or way or another in the destruction in Gaza. This book, I didn't need to do that. There's so much out there. There's so much out there. You know, the last memorial, what's called memorial, that the South Africans delegation submitted to ICJ. It's not been made public, but it's 750 pages with 4,000 pages of documentation. 750 pages with 4,000 pages of documentation. I said, I become superfluous after that. There are so many human rights reports now, so exhaustively documented by so many UN affiliate organizations, World Food Program, UNICEF, World Bank, documenting every dimension of the horror that's inflicted in Gaza. So I thought to myself, there's nothing new I can really add there. I don't have the narrative power. There are some people, and there will be written, I suspect, really extraordinary journalistic accounts of what happened in Gaza, though it's going to be tough because journalists weren't admitted, and those who were there were killed systematically by Israel. But I suspect the greatest single volume of journalistic literature on the Israel-Palestine conflict is Robert Fisk's Pity the Nation on the Lebanon War in 1982. It's just a breathtaking piece, not only of reportage, but of literature. It just has extraordinary narrative power. The book, I can't write that. I'm much too wooden a writer to write something of that caliber. So then I decided that I wanted to focus on what I've been focusing on a lot, which is how is all of this being played out in the legal dimension of the conflict. the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the various UN human rights commissions that have what are called commissions of inquiry, and to hold them accountable, because there's a lot of crookedness going on. There's been a lot of very inspiring work done. The ICJ has, in general, acquitted itself with honor. The International Court of Justice, there's no question in my mind about that. It didn't achieve anything because it couldn't, because of the US and the EU blocking it. But there's also people who, in my opinion, are either being bribed or blackmailed by Israel. And I want them to be held accountable. And I have a sufficient amount of authority right now. Now, of course, it's not a public authority. It's, my name is toxic. It's unmentionable in public, but people know I know what I'm talking about. And so they'll listen. And I'm hoping that there will be certain persons, to begin with, the vice president of the current International Court of Justice, Julia Sebutindi from Uganda. I hope she's going to be, once the book comes out, and I have about 90 pages on her, I'm hoping she'll be thrown off the court. I think it's possible she will be thrown off the court because she's either being paid or blackmailed by Israel. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And then there are others. I think Pramila Patten, who put out that fake report on rape on October 7th, I think she should be expelled from the UN. From the UN, yes, she's the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence and conflict. They use all these abbreviations. She's Special Secretary General, SSGR, SVC, all these titles. And she's just, what she did was just all lies. There's no evidence at all, really. There's no evidence at all. Look, what Hamas did on October 7th, there's a lot to be accountable for. There's no question in my mind about that. How you account for it, I think is an open question, but there were serious, significant breaches of the laws of war and of human rights, what's called human rights law. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But there are certain things that were said which are just false. There's no evidence. You can never prove a negative. Maybe rape happened. I can't tell you. Some riffraff from Gaza may have walked in and in some remote tunnel committed rape. It's possible. But the idea that, as was claimed, Hamas was using rape as a weapon of war, that's just complete nonsense. There's no evidence for it. I mean, I've reread the evidence over and over and over again. And you have one piece of evidence, which in my view decides the question. There are 5,000 still photographs that were preserved, 5,000, of October 7th. There was 50 hours of digital evidence preserved, CCTV, traffic cameras, body cams, and dash cams of the Hamas militants. Altogether, it came to 50 hours of video footage, what's called digital evidence of what happened on October 7th. There was not one image of sexual violence. None. Now, we were told there were rapes being committed everywhere. That's what we were told, especially at the Nova Music Festival. They were saying rapes were committed everywhere. Now, your generation videos everything. There's not an atrocity that's not videotaped in current society. The first thing people reach for. And as we know, Israelis are not averse to videotaping during war. We know that because they're posting all the videos of the horrors they're committing. So now there's a claim of between 15 and 38 eyewitnesses of rape, Israeli eyewitnesses of rape. Not one of them took a picture. They said they were hiding, they were on the ground watching it. Not one of them took a picture. Not one of them tried to videotape it. No. There's no forensic evidence of rape. There's no what's called medical legal evidence. None. None. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. No. I take that back in Amnesty. The UN Commission of Inquiry, Human Rights Watch, they both said, and believe me, they tried. They tried. I read the reports. They would try to pin anything on Hamas in order to show balance. They tried everything. They both of them said we cannot confirm rape having occurred. So that was Pramila Patten. She said she was the one that the Secretary General sent over, Gutierrez. And she said that there's reasonable grounds to believe that rape was occurred and gang rape had occurred. No, just complete lies. And so, she's another chapter in the book. It's called Rape Fantasies, because it's all fantasy. It's all made up. There was Sheryl Sandberg, the former Meta CEO, billionaire, and she did this film called Screams Before Silence. And she's all teary-eyed and overwhelmed as she's filming this documentary with her starring in it. It's it's Lenny Riefenstahl style.
I think it's more about the effects that they were going for, the shock of the 40 beheaded babies, the effect of mass systematic rape, which, again, every interview that even you do or we hear, the first or the second or third word that comes out of an Israeli official
Yeah,
is.
that's true. Still today, the beheadings and the rape. Yeah, yeah.
I think what was in the report was something about was like coerced intimacy is the most they found evidence for.
Well, yeah, that was the UN Commission of Inquiry. As I said, they did everything they could to pin the charge of sexual violence on Hamas. Now, remember, I'm not here to extenuate in terms of the factual record. As I said, the moral and legal judgment becomes more more elusive. But the factual record, horrible things happen, on October 7th. We can't discount that. Um, Yes, some of it may have been done by Israel, but all the human rights organizations saying it was overwhelmingly the deaths were committed by Hamas. I'm willing to, not Hamas, Gaza militants. Um, and I see no reason to doubt that. But then they're so desperate, so they want to prove sexual violence. So how they prove or they call gender-based violence. So how they prove gender-based violence? So they say, well, we saw this video of a woman who was being kidnapped, which is already a war crime under international law. She was dragged onto a motorcycle, not a motorcycle, a motor scooter, and she was forced to sit between two Palestinian men. And they call that, quote, the gender-based crime, violence, gender-based act of sexual violence, coerced intimacy. Namely, she was sitting between two, Arab men. It was just the most disgusting, really racist. I don't like to use the word racist in a glib way, but it was just all of this, racist conjurings of, oh, how disgusting to have to be in physical proximity to the point of being physically touched by these dark-hued Arabs. It's disgusting, it's like every time in the New York City subway at rush hour, when a white woman is uh, standing between two African American men. Is our Metropolitan Transportation Agency guilty of coerced intimacy by forcing her to stand between them? Shouldn't there be separate cars at rush hour for Black men and white women so they don't have to be subjected to coerced intimacy? The whole thing is just so wretchedly disgusting what these organizations, in their desperation to demonstrate the balance. Okay, just say taking hostages is a war crime under international law. Fine, fine. Now, I think Gaza had been taken hostage since 2006. I think the whole population was being held hostage by the Israeli government. It didn't allow anyone to go in, it didn't allow anyone to go out. It monitored what went in and what went out. It kept people on a starvation plus diet. Uh, they were born into what seems to have been a fairly common description of Gaza as a concentration camp. Well, to me, excuse my lack of legal precision, but that to me sounds like taking a whole population hostage. But let's leave that aside. Okay, say that the Hamas militants committed a war crime of taking hostages. Good, fine. Well, why are you throwing in this crap about coerced intimacy and calling it sexual violence? It's as if you take an Israeli woman hostage, you have to first order an Uber. You can't put her on a motorcycle. She has to be taken hostage in an Uber. Do you have Ubers in your part of the world? I don't know. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. Unserious. Worse than unserious, because that whole charge of sexual violence was used to inflame the situation and to turn it into it was an incendiary charge designed to create a hysteria. That's why the Israelis propagated it, to create an international hysteria to justify the horror that was inflicted on Gaza.
Now the saying goes, that every accusation is a confession on their part of everything that they are doing. So you have the horror and shock and awe of 40 imaginary beheaded babies, but 20,000 dead children, and no one blinks an eye. And at the same time, the documented evidence of sexual violence against male and female prisoners in Israeli prisons.
Not just male, female. The sexual violence has been it's been pretty, I won't say exhaustively, but it's been widely documented for sure. Women were forced to walk naked in the street. In the streets, women were forced to walk naked. Women were forced to walk in their underwear. Women were sexually molested. The rape charge itself, women were threatened with rape, but the rape charge itself was mostly directed at men, where they were broomsticks, batons were inserted in their rectum. That was with men, but women were very sexually abused. There were many, many reports of women walking naked in the street. So the sexual violence was pervasive. But the reports conclude, I never get phone calls. I don't know what's going on here. But the sexual violence was preponderantly, according to the human rights reports, I think it's probably true, the sexual violence was preponderantly against men and boys to shame them.
Since the United Nations is, according to Israel, run by Hamas, what advantage did the United Nations have by putting out that report?
Well, the Human Rights Council, after each of Israel's killing sprees in Gaza, has commissioned reports. And then there's a special a special dispensation from the Human Rights Council to monitor the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, and they periodically put out reports. So there was a commission of inquiry, and then there's a second body. I actually don't even know all the delineations at this point. So that's her obligation, but uh, try as you may, you're always hemmed in by political pressures. And so there is always the political pressure. You see it in the human rights community in general, but even the Human Rights Council, you see the political pressure for what's called balance. And to look for balance in these situations is slightly crazy. What is it? 20 or 30 children were said to be killed on October 7th. That's about the number of children nowadays killed each day in Gaza. The number is probably 20. The estimate is about 20,000 children have been killed. So 20 versus 20,000, and you're looking for balance? A little bit nuts.
More of that in your book, Gaza Gravediggers, which will be out next month. But
I'm not sure of next month, but it'll be, hopefully it'll be out before I'm gone.
But another book that is out recently is an expanded version of your 2023 work, I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, which is a blistering attack on wokeness and identity politics, which unfortunately pervades much of leftist discourse and activism now. In the book, well before October 7th, you already warned about the dangers of cancel culture and identity politics and social justice movements related to Palestine. Now, the book ended between the publication of the first edition and now the updated edition is 20 months of genocide. In your view, what impact has this wokeness had on pro-Palestinian activism in that period?
Well, we have to make a distinction between what would have happened in the absence of the what could and what couldn't have been prevented. What could and what couldn't have been prevented. In the case of the United States, there is a very powerful Jewish supremacist billionaire class. They're Jewish supremacists and they're billionaires. They also, like Jews, you would expect, they attended the best colleges and universities in our country. And like Jews, you would expect, they gave hefty alumni contributions. We're talking about serious bucks. The recent Harvard report on anti-Semitism, it gave two examples. Two Jewish alumni from Harvard who gave respectively, hold on to your seats, hold on to your seat. They gave respectively $200 and $300 million to Harvard. That's money. 200 gave, one gave, 300, wait, did I correctly say it? 200 million and 300 million to Harvard. One person gave $200 million as alumni contribution, and the other person gave 300 million. Bill Ackman, who became the best known, he's a famous hedge fund manager, he gave 50 million. And what did they do? They went to Harvard administration and they said, unless you crush the encampments, you're not getting our money. So even if wokeness hadn't come along, Harvard probably would have caved in, as Columbia, Brown, because the same thing was being done everywhere by these Jewish supremacist billionaires. However, it made their case, the wokeness made their case much easier. Why? Because the woke ideology on college campuses was, if a particular form of speech makes you feel unwelcome, this is unbelievable. If a particular form of speech makes you feel unwelcome or uncomfortable, unwelcome or uncomfortable, the speech should be canceled. That was the standard, that was the woke standard. the cancel culture standard. So every time a minority person said, well, that professor's speech made me feel unwelcome or uncomfortable, the professor comes under pressure not to say X, Y, or Z. So on page 37 of my cancel culture book, I say, this ain't a great idea. Let me tell you, folks, not a great idea. First of all, we're adults. We're in college. You don't get to silence speech because you don't like it. That's not what college is about. College is supposed to be about the pursuit of truth. And if a particular truth makes you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, well, we have an expression in the English language, quote, truth is often a bitter pill to swallow. But because it's a bitter pill to swallow, doesn't mean you get to veto it. So as a principle, it's an awful idea, because if you're a person of the left, as I consider myself, you consider truth to be a supreme value. The history of Western thought, I can't speak about others, not because they're unimportant, I'm just not familiar with them. From the beginning of Western thought to the present, the two most valued, the two highest ideals was truth and justice. Truth and justice, they always go together, from the ancients to the moderns, truth and justice. And you can't sacrifice truth because it hurts your feelings. So I wrote on page 37, guys, this is going to backfire, because the other side is going to say, well, those Palestinian speakers, or in this case, those Palestinian pro-Palestinian, as they're called, they weren't pro-Palestinian, they were anti-genocide. Those pro-Palestinian slogans like from the river to the sea hurt our feelings, make us feel unsafe, make us feel uncomfortable. And then the Jewish supremacist billionaire class comes into play, and they say, our Jewish students, they're not feeling comfortable, they're not feeling safe, they're not feeling welcome. So you have to crush the encampments. And they probably would have been crushed even in the absence of the woke culture, but it certainly made it easier. It certainly made it easier. I mean, you're in the UK. You'd be very surprised at our free speech laws in this country, as they've been held up by the Supreme Court. In our country, you have a legal right to burn the American flag. In our country, the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacist organization, has the right to burn crosses. In our country, the Nazi Party, the American Nazi Party, its right to conduct a demonstration in a largely Jewish neighborhood in Chicago, where a minority, but still significant minority, were Nazi Holocaust survivors. Our courts held that the Nazi Party had the right to demonstrate inside that neighborhood. We have pretty capacious free speech laws. Next to what our Supreme Court has ruled, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is nothing. It's nothing. When the court ruled the Nazi Party had the right to march in Skokie, Illinois, it was called, near Chicago, Skokie, Illinois, then the question came, Are they allowed to display the swastika? And it went to the court. Just the question of the swastika, the court upheld the right. It upheld the right for them to display the swastika. In a neighborhood of Jews, a significant minority of whom were Nazi Holocaust survivors. Okay? So we had a pretty formidable legal defense for from the river to the sea and things. I don't like the slogan, but that's beside the point. I don't have it's the right of free speech. I don't have to like every slogan, you know. But we lost all that. The woke culture extinguished it. Our most powerful, because you know why? I'll tell you why. Because they got carried away with their power. The universities became these liberal bastions of wokeness, and it never occurred to them that the other side may make a comeback. And then all the precedents that they had established would backfire on them. So they got carried away. You know, you start reading these treatises by very respected academics saying, we don't need balance in the classroom. We already know what's the truth. So we'll only tell the students what's the truth. We won't tell them any counter arguments. Well, that's not really being a very good teacher. That's not being a very good teacher. Okay, you know what's the truth for yourself. But how about letting students decide for themselves what they think is the truth? Isn't that what college is supposed to be about? Students being adults and mentally thinking through questions on their own, and not for you to tell them what is the truth? It had gotten, listen, the backlash that's ensued, and which Trump, of course, ran with, that backlash was a result of how these woke liberals were carrying on. It was a result of that. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Even if the disaster didn't happen, I still oppose it. Because people are supposed to find truth on their own. They're not supposed to be treated like children, where they're not capable of reasoning and all they're doing is taking in information. No, you're supposed to process that information on your own. So I didn't like it at all, even in the woke days. But in the post-woke days, it's a catastrophe because they ran with it, the other side. The big difference between the pro-Palestine, as they call themselves, crowd, and the Jewish crowd is the pro-Palestine side, all they had was their mouths and their bodies, okay? The other side had billions of dollars. And then they leveraged their wealth, but they also used the language of wokeness, because the woke people had completely abandoned the tradition of truth and the importance of pursuing truth. You know, they came up with all these stupid things like, oh, truth is just a construction, and there's no such thing as truth, and there's only narratives, there's no truth. You know, oh yeah, sure. So there's a narrative, there's a German narrative in Auschwitz, and there's a Jewish narrative, and there's no truth. They're just narratives. No, don't, please. Just nauseates me, the kind of idiotic thinking that set in. So, as I said, probably in the long run, they would have lost anyway because the money was too much. It was too much. It was our whole higher education system has been prostituted to money, to be, you know, you're judged by the size of your endowment, and I'm not referring now to your penis. You're judged by the size of your endowment and the alumni contributions. And that has just completely corrupted higher education. I don't remember that, honestly, in the 60s or the 70s, where people were, uh, universities were so, they were so enthralled to the billionaire class. Now it's everywhere. Now it's everywhere. Everybody. Uh, if you, I don't know if you've ever been to an American university now, but you know what? In my day, growing up, a university was judged by the quality of its library. It's a library. You know what it's judged by now? The size of its gym. I mean that. That's the draw.
Interesting. I mean, what we're seeing
Tra-
is
tragic, tragic.
we're seeing like the right wing reclaiming the cancel culture, which they actually rolled out in the first place. And like, an interesting example there is like the case study of someone like a Jordan Peterson who built his entire career around academic freedom and style of free speech and so forth. But when it came to
Right,
the
and
issue of
then, and
Gaza,
then
now he's saying that all league universities should have their independence withdrawn and kick out the students and deport them.
I know
How do you explain that?
the side switched. I tell you, it's very easy to explain. It's by who has the power. When the woke crowd, the liberal arts universities went woke, they felt they had the power and they ran with it. We don't have to have balance in the classroom. And if we think you're a racist, you have to shut up. And if we think you're a sexist, you have to, you can't speak and all of that, because they were in charge. They didn't prepare for the day when they may lose the power. And now that happened with Trump coming into office. They've lost the power. But if now they talk about free speech, you have to laugh at it. Because they never believed in free speech. They didn't. They dismissed the whole idea, as I said, with all these very clever ideas about truth being a social construction and there's no truth, there's just narratives. They abandoned the principle of pursuing truth. So they had no leg to stand on. You have to laugh at them. Oh, you believe in freedom of speech? No, not really. Oh, we went through that era. We went through the woke era. No, you didn't believe in it. You had no commitment whatsoever to it, none. And now you want to play that card? You don't have that card to play because everybody remembers what happened.
The Derrida and Foucault sales will drop going into the next few years.
I never read any of them. They never had any interest for me. If I'm going to tackle something difficult, I'll try to tackle Kant. I don't care much about. I understand some of what Foucault said, that there's solid research there. Fine. And in my third next life, I'll maybe pick up a book.
Okay, the final question before possibly if we've got any time for an audience question, but the final from my side is zooming all the way out. And given the shifting political tide in Europe and specifically in the UK, the government changing its tune now, cancelling some arms licenses, suspending free trade talks, and gearing to potentially recognize a Palestinian state. And more broadly speaking, the general public is finding it growingly untenable. And I think a good emblematic indicator of that is Piers Morgan's changing stance. And there's similar shifts happening over Europe. And from Israel, we're hearing, Ehud Olmert write, op-eds categorically saying, that enough is enough. Israel's committing war crimes, of course, taking issue with the fact that he's calling it a war crime rather than genocide, meaning there is no war. But given that shift, however small it is, and I know that hope has been a very rare commodity over the last 20 months, but do you attach any hope whatsoever to this changing tide, or is it too little too late?
But people like Der Stürmer, Kerr Stürmer, my view is better never than late with people like him. Look, any life saved could be your life. There's an adage that says, when each person dies, a whole world is destroyed. When each person, because you understand, with each death, a whole world is destroyed because each person comprehends a world, and that world is destroyed when that person dies. So any life that can be saved is it's a worthy undertaking. There, but for the grace of God, go I. But there's nothing left in Gaza. Gaza is gone. Gaza is they used to call it an open air prison. Now it's just a parking lot. And I don't believe there's any possibility Israel will allow for it to be rebuilt. That just does not seem plausible to me. So we have to operate within two parameters. Parameter number one, if we can save one life, it's a worthy undertaking. Parameter on the other end, one pole is save any life, it's a worthy undertaking. The other pole is Gaza is gone. And then we have to navigate between those two poles. Obviously, there's still people alive in Gaza. Those people are hungry. And as Greta Thunberg said, if you give up on them because you believe it's hopeless, you've lost your humanity. And I think that's correct. But I don't think we should have illusions unless every international organization is lying, from UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. Every organization says it would take, if there were 100 trucks a day, it would take about 20 years to rebuild Gaza. Israel will not even admit 2 trucks a day once the cameras are off it. Once the cameras are gone, there'll be no trucks submitted, because they were resolved on October 8th to once and for all solve the Gaza question. And that solution entailed ethnic cleansing, making Gaza unlivable, and a large extermination. After 20 months of implementing their final solution for Gaza, they're not about to do an about face and rebuild it for the people of Gaza. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen, in my opinion. And now that may sound, oh, Norman is throwing cold water. He's so pessimistic. He hurts the movement. I've not given up. When I get off this interview, I'll be right back at work. But I don't believe it's correct, it's right to treat adults like children. These are the facts as I see them, and I'm always, as I said, willing to acknowledge my fallibility. These are the facts, and then you do with them as you like. And you kind of dismiss them. You could just say, I'm wrong. And I've been many times wrong. I've also been many times right. When I was last on Piers Morgan 3 weeks ago, when the talk was about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I said, it's perfectly obvious what's going to happen. They're going to push everybody to the south, and then they're going to start the massacres at the distribution center. And then they're going to say, oh, it was chaotic, there was confusion, we fired warning shots, and then to defend ourselves, we felt afraid. That's what I said, word for word. 1 week later, what happened? They started to commit the massacres, exactly as I said. People say, well, is he clairvoyant? No, I know the history. I know exactly what they're going to do. perfectly obvious what they're going to do. So,
On that sobering note, I think that those are all of my questions. Thank you very much for your time.
yeah, it's 2:16, so I really have to go. And another day.
Thank you so much for giving us all the time you have over the year as well, and another day indeed. And thank you to everyone in the audience who are here.